Before we start this video, I've got a little paid ad I've got to show you guys.
Do you hate Gift Week? Do you wish to see Jamie crash beneath your feet? Do you go into anger fit when you see Jamie Cox on screen? Well, you're in luck. I hate him too. To help the cause of destroying Gift Week, it only costs beautiful 39 rubles of dollars. $39? Dollars a month for your one-time reward. I hate Gift Week sticker. The money will be used ethically to seduce Dangerous Dan to help us take down that bourgeois pig of Gift Week. So call now 1-800 I hate Gift Week. Am I free to go yet?
What? What was that? Who put that in my review? Elfen Lied is the most vilest piece of trash I've ever watched, and I'm not even sure I'm exaggerating. Now, I am well aware that the Family Guy joke is kind of a meme at this point, but in every sense of the word, this show insists upon itself. It is obnoxious, nonsensical, but most egregious of all, it is boring. This show is for people who think that Joker wasn't subtle enough. I feel that the most compelling argument as to why this show sucks would to just be to show you the entire thing. But I'm not gonna do that because I like the people who watch my terrible YouTube videos. Now, I already foresee that people are going to tell me I'm being too harsh with this string of insults. To that I say, I'm not saying you're not allowed to like this show. In fact, I think you are allowed to like Elfen Lied, given that you are under the age of 14. I suppose it is worth explaining what Elfen Lied is to the uninitiated. Elfen Lied is an anime from 2004 that is most remembered for how incredibly violent and dark it is. The show is based on a manga by the same name that started in 2002 and ended in 2005. Here's a very basic plot synopsis of Elfen Lied. Lucy, what is known as a diclonius, a genetic offshoot from humans with a set of 4 invisible telekinetically controlled arms, escapes from a scientific laboratory in the opening scene. When a sniper trying to kill her shoots her but does not kill her, this results in the forming of a split personality. Cut to mainland Japan, where Kota, our main character, is reuniting with his cousin Yuka. Kota has amnesia and can't seem to remember something significant that happened to him in his past. Kota and Yuka go to a beach where they find Lucy washed ashore. Lucy's split personality, New, is taken into the house of Kota and Yuka out of sympathy, and is the dominant personality for most of this series unless it's relevant for Lucy to come out. The government agency which Lucy broke free from is trying to recapture her and they fail. Introduce like 13 pointless characters and B-plots that don't go anywhere, until the final 2 episodes, where it is revealed that the thing Kota can't seem to remember is Lucy murdered his entire direct family, and it ends, or something. Elfen Lied covers topics of murder, rape, animal abuse, and child molestation. Now please note how I didn't say in that previous sentence explores or themes, because Elfen Lied has little interest in actually exploring these subjects, and it is very much like a baby's first type show, but more on that later. Part 1. The things I like. Now, before I tear apart this show, I'd like to first talk about a couple of positives. You know, just in the interest of fairness. For those here to watch this show get torn to pieces, don't worry, this won't take that long. First off, I really love the opening theme song and titular Elfen Lied, Lilium. This song is an atmospheric piano ballad with strings that create a simultaneously elegant and yet haunting tone. The way the singer's voice swells, paired with the stills, clearly inspired by the art of Austrian symbolist painter Gustav Klimt, but most directly, his painting The Kiss amplified the tone of this song. Now, some people may call this imagery a little heavy-handed, but this is anime we're talking about here. They aren't exactly known for their subtle imagery. This opening clearly serves to create some kind of contrast between itself and the violent nature of the show. I'll admit, I'm a sucker for this technique. For another example, Neon Genesis Evangelion's jazzy and exciting opening contrasts the bleak and depressing tone which the show itself takes on. So yeah, I like this show's opening theme song a good deal. However, to make this a bit of a backhanded compliment, the song will get overused and abused throughout the course of the show when it is played during every single moment that is supposed to be emotional, because the people making this crap know it's the only good thing going for them. Speaking of openings, the opening scene of this show is incredibly violent, and when isolated from the other 13 episodes of terrible bullshit, it sets a great tone. The cold, scientific environment suddenly interrupted by a flurry of chaos is really exceptionally well executed here. So yeah, there are definitely some good things going here, and they just all happen to be at the very start of the show. If there is anything else positive I have to say, it's that some of the character deaths are incredibly satisfying, but that's mostly because you loathe the characters independently of anything the show has done. Anyways, that's all the positives I have. There's like 2.5 of them. Let's get to the issues with this show. Part 2. The characters. The first and foremost issue with any piece of media is that if you don't find any of the characters either relatable and or interesting, the rest of the piece of media in question might as well not even be there. Another thing that helps with a cast of characters is if they are diverse, and before any of you alt-right people get triggered and write a mean comment about how television shows are only supposed to feature white people, this goes beyond just race. When I say diversity, I'm referring to the cast of characters all having different personalities that bounce off one another in creative and interesting ways. Despite Elfen Lied having a main cast of about 5 or 6 characters, each and every single one of them misses the bar of relatability or intrigue entirely and can be grouped exclusively into one of 2 categories. Characters are either A. saltine crackers defined only by their emotional trauma, or B. unlikable assholes with no redeeming or at least interesting character traits. The main cast of Kota, Mayu, Yuka, and Nana all fall into category A. Lucy and pretty much every single other character falls into category B. Now, to prove my point, I asked a couple of friends who have also watched Elfen Lied to describe to me the characters in this show without describing their traumatic backstory or the level to which the character was unpleasant to watch. Lucy.
She is angry.
Yeah, wasn't it? She was like angry at something.
But she got like she was shot in the first episode, and wait, that's trauma. She had an annoying other personality that was stupid and halted the plot.
That's kind of describing your annoyance with the character.
Fuck. Yeah, I got nothing.
Morgan, do you have anything? Kota.
Isn't he like every himbo?
UG every lead.
He's like every himbo anime protagonist ever.
I genuinely struggled to think of a character trait. Like, I don't even remember him displaying an emotion. I remember Lucy being angry. I don't remember him, like... I don't remember what he did or accomplished or felt or thought beside occasionally wanting to... No, he didn't. He was aloof about wanting to bone his cousin.
Now, to further prove my point, I've asked those same friends to describe the characters from Full Metal Alchemist Brotherhood in the same way. Is this comparison fair? Nope. Once again, in the interest of fairness, I asked them to restrict their descriptions to the characters' personalities only within the first 13 episodes of the show, which is the same runtime as Elfen Lied's entire story, so I think that's incredibly fair. Edward ELRIC.
Alright. He is hot-headed and brash, but he is deeply sympathetic and empathetic to people with, like, deeply rooted traumatic struggles. He is continually in a state of trying to make up for what he did in the past. He has a bit of a complex of kind of a survivor's guilt of sorts, of the fact that he feels like he lost less than Alphonse did, and that makes him feel really bad about it. But he is also very, like, he's driven, and he wants to encourage and motivate people. Like in the episode with Father Cornello, at the end of the episode, he's really forward with Rose about trying to tell her, he's like, you got 2 feet, stand up and walk, got 2 good legs. He also he's not a sad boy all the time. Like in Miracle at Rush Valley, he's very happy. A good character.
Morgan, can you add anything to that?
I don't think I can, really.
You can see how in only 1/5 of Full Metal Alchemist Brotherhood's story, the characters already have so much more depth and personality than in all of Elfen Lied's story. Part 3. The story structure. Typically, when crafting a story, you want it to follow what is called the 3-act structure. It is a very basic storytelling element. In Act 1 of your story, you have your exposition and rising action. This serves to introduce the audience to the characters and world. During Act 2, the characters are thrust out of their element and the stakes get higher. At the start of Act 3, the characters enter crisis, where they are at their lowest point physically and or emotionally. Over the course of Act 3, the characters overcome their greatest obstacle or obstacles, and the story concludes. It's a really basic formula that is perfectly acceptable to use, and some of the most popular movies ever, like Star Wars, Raiders of the Lost Ark, and Die Hard, utilize the 3-act structure. Now, how does the 3-act structure apply to television? Well, it can be used for individual episodes or for the course of the entire show. For example, one singular episode of Fooly Cooly contains an entire 3-act structure as well as the entire show. You'll also notice as how the line moves from left to right, the stakes in the story get greater and greater. Elfen Lied's plot structure resembles something akin to an upside-down bell curve. This show is horribly boring because from approximately episodes 3 to 11, virtually nothing of consequence happens. Now, I understand that people will make the argument that Nana losing all of her limbs in episode 5 would seem to be important, but it is rendered unimportant when she just gets them back like an episode later. On an episode-to-episode basis, the bell curve structure also applies. You see those peaks on the bell curve? Those happen to be the opening and ending themes of the show. This is because the midsections of these episodes are filled with characters rambling on about their dull lives and dull conflicts while doing dull, meaningless activities around the house. Have I said dull enough?
Talk to the professor tomorrow.
We can't.
Why can't we?
Because Professor Cock is...
Well, well.
Oh.
A love affair. Isn't that just terrific?
It wasn't me. I swear, you started it.
So, it's okay if I stay here?
Where else were you planning on going?
It's just... So, well, it's okay if I stay here? A love affair. Isn't that just terrific?
It wasn't me.
Another major problem with the structure of Elfen Lied is that the story has no main villain or conflict for the characters to overcome. Like, seriously, who is the show's main villain? You might say the government agency is the main villain, but unless you're making some weird art house project, which Elfen Lied is not, you need to have some kind of representative body for an agency. For example, you wouldn't say Skynet is the main villain of the Matrix, you'd say Agent Smith. In Terminator, it's the T-1000. In Star Wars, it's Grand Moff Tarkin, Darth Vader, and the Emperor. In America, it's Donald Trump. So, who is the representative body of the government agency and, by extension, the main villain of Elfen Lied? First off, it isn't this guy, because he just sits in a chair and says vaguely suspect things and doesn't really do anything. It isn't this guy, because no one takes him seriously as a threat. And it most certainly isn't this guy, because he's presented as sympathetic. This amounts to the show having no sense of tension or urgency, further killing the pacing. As mentioned earlier, this show is filled with violence and traumatic, touchy subjects, but even those manage to become stale. This is because of what is called the law of diminishing returns. Diminishing returns is the idea at a certain point, once you do something too many times, it eventually stops being as effective as it originally was. And once you see so many heads being torn off or so many scenes of nudity, it ultimately stops becoming impactful and starts being boring. What you come to realize is that eventually all of the violence, the death, the trauma, and babbling serves to misdirect away from what Elfen Lied truly is. No, it is not this violent seinen show. It is in fact an airheaded harem show, with 4 girls eventually living with the main character at one point. Once you come to this realization, all of the meaningless babble just starts to make sense, because it's supposed to be a form of, character drama that ultimately doesn't work because you have no investment whatsoever in these characters. All it serves to do is just further your downward spiral of increasing boredom. Part 4. The plot. To help illustrate the boredom that this show induces in me, I have to briefly touch on the actual story of Elfen Lied, or at least the story of Elfen Lied that matters to the creators. That part being that Elfen Lied is about the romance between Lucy and main character Coda. For those of you who are wondering why I'm referring to him as main character Coda, it's because that's the only way I remember who I'm talking about in the script for this video. The X factor of this romance, which is supposed to make it interesting, is that Lucy murdered Kota's entire family, and Kota has plot-convenient amnesia and cannot remember that Lucy murdered his entire family. Now, some of you might think that would be possibly interesting, but what makes it uninteresting is that neither of these details are revealed to the viewer until episode 12 of 13, so by the time you could presumably care about any of this, the show is already on a fast track to being over. What makes this more annoying in retrospect is that Lucy, throughout the show, holds all of the cards and just refuses to do anything with them. Instead of just telling Kota who she is when she has the opportunity, she just instead chooses to spout vague ravings about how she and Kota can't be together because he's too good for her, or some equally pretentious drivel. This just kills any rewatchability the show may have, because the viewer is just constantly screaming at their television set for her to just tell him what happened, because that would be the logical thing for any human being alive on this planet to do. What's probably most depressing about this is that the solution to this glaring problem is just very simple. All you need to do is 2 things. First, drop the whole amnesia thing. It's cliched, trite, and overdone and redundant, just like this sentence. Secondly, place the backstory at the beginning of this show. These 2 things together will have a fantastic effect, and it's called character dynamic. You can imagine the number of creative writing possibilities which could be explored if the show was about the reuniting of these childhood friends, one of whom murdered the other's entire direct family, and they have to work together to overcome these issues. Now that sounds like an actual concept, but instead Elfen Lied explores the road that is far more often taken by hack showrunners. For those who aren't convinced that the placing of the backstory at the end of the show was a bad idea, let's imagine Fullmetal Alchemist Brotherhood. If Ed and Al's backstory was revealed during episode 60, and throughout the entire show, Ed knew everything about why Al was in his metallic body, and he just refused to tell him, that would be the most frustrating thing of all time to watch. Part 6. The production value. Elfen Lied is one of the most hideous shows I've ever seen. The characters look completely separate from their environments in many scenes, and when the character is not the subject of a scene, they just seem to melt. It's not like it matters anyways, because all of these character designs are the most generic early 2000s anime blobs you've ever laid your eyes on. A lazy technique this show will often use to save budget is, while one character is talking, the show will hold on the person being talked at to save budget on lip flaps. Continuing on the same topic, there are a bunch of still frames that are held on for long periods of time throughout this show. Everything I've shown you in this video, with the exception of the opening theme song, has been sped up to around 110% or 125%. This is what the show looks like at normal speed.
It's too late to be out playing. Didn't your teacher tell you there's a curfew?
It's dangerous. Go straight home.
Now I get that budget constraints are a thing, and sometimes you need these still frames a la Trigun, but nothing in this show looks good enough to justify these still frames being held on for so long. If a scene includes multiple characters, it's almost even possible to tell the order of each animation cell with each respective character. To prove my point about these character designs being the worst thing ever, here are 3 silhouettes. 2 of them are major characters from Elfen Lied, and 1 of them is from the show Ghost Stories. Ideally, with a great character design and animation, you should be able to tell me which character is which, because they would ideally be so distinct. However, I'm willing to bet that some of you who have seen the show are struggling to tell me which of these 3 designs doesn't belong. So, is the out of place one A, B, or C? I'll give you a second to think about it. For the record, the correct answer is C. I called back my volunteers from earlier and had them ponder this same question which I proposed to you, and here's their response to it.
Like, maybe C? Maybe? I don't, like, yeah, that's it. That's all I got.
I'm inclined to agree. Like, B is so featureless that it's definitely a contender.
And I feel like A might be a Diclonius because of the weird head thing.
That looks like the other pink-haired girl who slaughtered the classroom full of people. So I'm going to go with C.
Maybe. Like, I have no clue, honestly.
Okay, well, C is correct. That is a character from Ghost Stories.
You fucking madman. Whereas if you showed me a silhouette of, like, Gone from Hunter x Hunter, I would have immediately known who it was.
You may think this is a weird point to harp on so much, but then let's talk about the Fate franchise. The entirety of the Fate franchise has been sold almost solely on the fact that the character designs for Rin and Saber look absolutely stunning. And if character design doesn't matter, the idea of waifu culture as a whole would not be relevant. Because let me tell you, most people don't have waifus because they relate to the characters' personalities. They have waifus because they're well-designed characters. Continuing with the atrocious visuals, random CGI elements will be thrown on top of scenes, such as petals floating from one side of the screen to the other, without much in the way of purpose, other than, I guess, to distract the audience from the terrible dialogue going on at the moment. Filmmaking techniques which Elfen Lied fails to use include dynamic shots, or dynamic shot composition at the very least. I cannot think of one creative visual in the entire show, and the thing is, the show's animation being terrible isn't all that surprising, considering it's made by Studio Arms. What else has Studio Arms made? Porn. They made porn. Not all that surprising, eh? Wait a minute. A name referencing appendages? Terrible, constantly off-model drawings? Was this show made by many hands? Part 6. The Politics. It is said that in some way all art is inherently political, or at least trying to make some sort of political statement, however major or minor. The entirety of Elfen Lied's political thesis and argument can be summarized in 3 words, and they are as follows. A society. Bottom text. Part 7. No, I'm serious. That is literally all that can be discerned from this show. Despite all the death, murder, rape, incest, animal cruelty, child molestation, there is so little backbone to this show. I can say with 100% certainty that if a character appears for less than 2 minutes of screen time, they are a comically snide asshole who is just the worst human being to ever exist. For instance, in episode 10, for the first time in my life, I've witnessed someone getting mad at a little girl, presumably less than 10 years old, for being passed out on the ground after a bunch of people have just been murdered. That's only one example, and there are tons of them throughout the show, like Mayui's stepfather who molests her because she needs to have a traumatic backstory, or cops who get mad at the same character for being homeless. It just never ends. These characters make the kids who beat up Arthur Fleck at the beginning of Joker look subtle by comparison. The only other smidgen of political discourse I can squeeze out of the bone-dry sponge that is this show is that forgiving mass murderers is okay, and, you know, I haven't checked my history lately, but I'm pretty confident that's a terrible message to send, and I'm just gonna move on. Part 7. Why does this show exist? So, we've established that the characters suck, the story is irrelevant and boring, there is virtually no production value to this show, and it's not trying to make some sort of political statement. Then, for just what reason was Elfen Lied made? And well, there's no beating around this, so let's just rip the bandage right off. This show was made because it is someone's fetish, and I think that is made incredibly apparent from the moment that Lucy's split personality New pisses herself. That scene just solidifies the fact that this is a show for someone who has a fetish for girls with pink hair and horns. This is why I chose not to pick apart every single plot point of this show, like how the Diclonius don't make sense as a genetic concept without some further explanation, which the show simply doesn't give us because it doesn't matter. The author just has no care for these things at all, because if the author was truly interested in these concepts, like the dynamics of Diclonius fights between Diclonii with different arm lengths and different arm numbers, then that's what this show would have been about. All that matters in this show is the author's monster girl and harem fetish, and I suppose whatever fucked up kind of relationship Lucy and main character Coda have. Everything else in this show just exists to disguise this blatant fact about the text from the average viewer who is just watching the show for the violence and disturbing elements. Part 8. Why even bother? The more observant of you will remember how earlier in this video I mentioned that the idea of this being a baby's first show would be relevant to later in the discussion. And, well, now it finally is relevant to the discussion because this show is very much baby's first gore, baby's first animal abuse, baby's first so-and-so, and that is the exact appeal of Elfen Lied. Elfen Lied is an initiation to darker, more mature topics, which it does not tackle with any depth or meaning or purpose behind it. You'll remember earlier I compared Elfen Lied to Joker, but a more accurate analogy would be to the human centipede, specifically the first one. This show just has a mildly disturbing backbone, but it never gets more disturbing or creative with that concept than it would take someone to write down like 3 or 4 ideas about that concept, which is pretty much exactly like the first Human Centipede movie. The thing is, the show's plot also doesn't really matter to the people watching it. They are there for the extreme turbo violence they were promised by other people who had watched the show. People do not connect with this show's characters. They do not connect with the story. They are just there for the violence. So the question arises, if this show's story is so clearly irrelevant to a lot of viewers, why make a video dissecting what's wrong with it? To that I answer, what is the point of this show? Why do we consume bad art that will momentarily shock us but leave no lasting impact, rather than great art that will permanently shock us and leave a lifelong impact on us? Well, the answer to that is much more simple and depressing than you would imagine, and it's because people don't want to think too hard about these things. It's because concepts like murder, animal abuse, incest, molestation are just truly horrid, and truly engaging with these concepts would inevitably promote some sort of self-reflection within people. That's exactly why I say Elfen Lied is the vilest trash I've ever watched. Not because it features so many touchy subjects, but just because it refuses to do anything meaningful with this multitude of touchy subjects and instead chooses to just simply waste the viewer's time. And even what I said about this show being obviously bad isn't true, because plenty of people adore this show, otherwise it wouldn't have an 8.0 on IMDb and a 7.26 on my anime list, so there are clearly people who defend it. I guess I just don't get it. Thank you for watching. Okay, so I've been working on this Elfen Lied video for like 2 weeks now at this point. I'm finally done. But then I find a mug in my house. And look what painting that is. This stupid show refuses to leave me alone.